From God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, December 28th, 2018, our final program for 2018. And moving into a new year, I can honestly tell you, I don't recall ever having a time where I've seen so much activity on the world scene that affects future prophecy and affects the lives of you and I as we're entering into for 2019 right now. So with that said, let's get started for our program today. We're going to talk about the U.S. borders and the government shutdown. We're going to show you the magnification of how this is going into other parts of the world and how the world's tipping in, especially the Pope. Then we're going to talk about the Middle East and the pulling out of Syria and the problems that that's going to represent. And then we're going to do something different. You're going to love this section this time. We're going to go into our biblical nuggets portion of our program. We're going to talk about the liberal left, political or biblical. And what we're going to show you out of the Bible may surprise you about what the Bible says about the left and liberalism. So you ready? Let's get started with this program. I'm going to start with the news first, just a couple of short news pieces. First is the Dow stock market. We've been receiving emails and phone calls from people asking me, well, we're going to cover the stock market and the economics. Well, as we've said in programs earlier in the year, we're going to talk a lot about that beginning in January as we move into the second year of the fulfillment of Donald Trump's administration and where we're at. But the economics moved so fast in the final 3 months of 2018, I wanted to bring this out to you. This is a chart, what you're looking at right here is an entire chart of the Dow market for 2018 from January into December. Now, a lot of people don't realize, but the Dow, it only consists of 30 companies. It's not a huge indicator of the companies, whereas the S&P is actually an index of 500 companies, which gives you a better feel of the entire economy. However, these companies indicate or leading indicators of the nation of how they operate. So let's take a look at this right quick and just real briefly, because we're going to come into this in just a few weeks as we begin talking about the economics. In the 52-week range of what I just circled right there, the stock market at a low, which was actually just a couple days ago, 21,792, from its high of 26,951 points, is a 5,159 point fall. That is huge. That's never been seen to have that kind of fall as far as points go. Percentage-wise, you need to look at where we're at in the scale of 25,000 versus where you were at 5,000 or 10,000. But the point is the percentages, even still with that, took place in just less than 3 months. Less than 3 months, what we're looking at. So let me show you something here. As you might have heard the president talking about the Fed and raising rates. At the beginning of the year, as the market began its tear in January of last year, by February, the Fed moved the market to raise interest rates or tighten the loan and tighten what it's going to cost the credit with a lot of companies and businesses. They raised the first raise. Look what happened in February. That was the first raise of the year. So now for those who don't know what that is, we'll talk about that in just a couple weeks about what the Fed market does and how it operates. Then it went along pretty well until we see here. Now we're in December, so each one of these lines are going across is a month. In December, what you're looking at now was the Feds again talking about tightening and raising the interest rate again, and it just dropped off the cliff. And in fact, December is proving to be the worst December since the Great Depression. This is unbelievable what's taking place. Of course, we've seen a lot of the pundits talk about the president shouldn't be talking about the Fed. So exactly what's going on there. Believe it or not, what he's talking about, he is correct in the market as far as what the Fed is doing and what it's not doing. And this is why this happened the last time they began to raise the interest rates again, because there is no inflationary problem. So what's taking place is that the Fed is beginning to tighten its own monetary system to give it ammunition for a potential stock market or a potential economic fall or recession in the near future. That's what scared everybody off, and that's what they're talking about. And they're talking about the possibility of having to refinance over $1 trillion in debt in the year 2019. At the same time that China and some of the other countries who've been buying our debt say we're not buying any more debt as long as the tariffs are going on. So this whole thing of what we're talking about is so intertwined, it's going to take a few programs to be able to get through to explain exactly what's going on. And as we've always said, follow the money. And when you've seen that happen, the money says we're getting out of here before it collapses. And so that's what's going on right now. I don't see a collapse right now. I just see a lot of easy money and a lot of nervous people getting out of the market by the end of the year to take their gains and head down the road and get ready to see what's going to happen next year, which we will cover beginning in just a couple of weeks. So I wanted to mention that to you, let you know we're on top of that, and we'll start bringing that to you as we move into 2019. Second quick story I want to talk about is the Indonesian tsunami and the collapse of the volcano, in case you didn't hear about that. The death toll from Anak Krakatoa, the volcano rise, as of Tuesday, this was December 25th, the death toll had risen to 429 people. There's still 154 people that are still missing, and over 1,500 people are injured, as the Indonesian Migration Agency reports. So as I was looking at this, I was having trouble trying to separate the news, because you see, just before this in October, this is October 8th, 2018, they went through another earthquake and another tsunami back then. The death toll back then, just 2 months ago, the death toll in the earthquake and the tsunami passed 1,900 people, you know, as it continues to rise to this day. More than 70,000 homes were destroyed or damaged by the magnitude 7.5 quake that struck September 28th, and the launching waves as high as 6 meters. So you had 20-foot waves, actually 19.6, I think is what it was. Almost 20-foot waves actually rolling into shore over the people's homes, and that followed the earthquake that just broke everything all up before the tsunami hit. So that was 800 miles west of Sulawesi, or somewhere in Indonesia. They live on the fault line, in which we began talking about that just a few months ago. We're going to be focused more on this, and the reason I'm bringing these two items up as quick news is the economics and the earthquakes is part of the predictions of the end-time scenarios that God says that we're supposed to watch for. So because of that, I wanted to make sure that you're aware that we stay on top of these news that we can bring to you each and every week. Now, let's get to the focus. Borders and partial government shutdown. All right, so now, here we're going to cover it in 3 areas. No money for the border wall, lots of money for the migrants, and of course, the Pope and the migrants and security. Every time something happens into the West now, you're seeing the Pope have to chime in. And we're seeing what we don't realize and the world doesn't see is these are spiritual battles that are taking place. Is the evil tries to subdue the West to be able to take control of the rest of the world. And eventually that'll take place. So as we cover these 3 areas, let's begin with the Pope and the borders. The Pope Francis calls for migrants to flood the U.S. Forget national security. This was reported in Prophecy News. Now, you might have seen this report, but this report, they were reporting, came back earlier in the summer, and there was a later report that came out as far as October goes. But I want to draw your attention to something here. Pope Francis calls for migrants to flood the borders. Interesting terminology that the Pope used is to flood the borders. Now, we're talking about people walking in, breaking over the lines or coming through whichever way they can get in. But that has a biblical ring to it. It's quite interesting is that the Pope would use that term, flooding the borders. So let's talk about that. And we're going to go here now. Personal safety trumps national security. We're talking about basically what the Pope was referencing. This is from PJ Media. Pope says the migrants' rights should override national security concerns. Interesting that the Vatican is surrounded by some of the biggest walls in their own army, that he would talk about the migrants overriding security concerns. Pope Francis said that the message ahead of Roman Catholic Church on World Day, the migrants and refugees The principle of the centrality of human person obliges us to always prioritize personal safety over national security. Does it? Actually, the Bible talks about there'll be disobedience at the end time, and there will be rebellious to laws. Anytime that you take the person over law, then you're going to have anarchy, and that's what's going on with the illegal immigration of the people. The personal welfare should be taken care of. But the issue isn't, all right, let me repeat this. The issue isn't the concern, I'm trying to say this as clear as we can. It isn't the concern of just the people coming in, because they can be coming in legally. It's the concern ought to be to the nations where the people are fleeing from. But they never talk about that. They always want to criticize the nation who's trying to maintain security, law, and order, just as the Bible says they should have, because the Bible says we're entitled to borders. In the Old Testament with Israel, he set borders for them and gave them the protection. In the New Testament, look at the new heaven and the new earth. You look at Jerusalem, it's got walls. It actually has walls. Go back and take a look. The problem is, and what the Pope doesn't want to bring out, is the problem is the governments where they're fleeing from. That's where the issue should be taken up. But it's never taken up that way. The UN never takes it up that way. They always go after the countries who are trying to maintain law and order. Why? Because we're fighting against the evil of this world. And the evil of this world will not obey the laws, and especially the laws of God. So that's what we're looking at here. All right? So when you see something like this, this goes very deep spiritually. So now let's move on. So he says, forget about national security concerns. December 18th, he chimed in again. Pope Francis called on the migrants to flood the United States and other Western nations, whilst urging the world leaders to forget about national security. That would be interesting if he just fired everybody in his army around the Vatican, took the walls down, and let everybody just do whatever they want to. That would be interesting to see how that would happen. Same with all the people in Washington or out in California, those with a lot of money who live in gated security environment, talking about taking down the walls. It says, forget about national security concerns as immigrants' needs, or more important than borders. Then if that's the case, then let's go to the government who's creating the problem. You can't fix the problem if you don't go to the source. So going on. Oh, by the way, let me just stop there. I just had to bring this in. Look at that wall. That's the Vatican. Walls are not important. Security is not important. That's what we're being told. There's another wall on another side. Interesting that was saying, let's not forget about security. So the head of the Catholic Church is calling on political leaders to drop their country's current screening, deportation policy and give precedent to migrants' requirements over the safety of their legal immigrants. Forget about who they are, where they came from. Doesn't matter if they're terrorists. Doesn't matter if their interest is to come in and destroy the country. Let them in anyway. That's what you're being told, and that's what you're hearing from the Vatican. So now, let's put some biblical nuggets to what we're looking at here. Migrant to flood the U.S. So what does the Bible say? So this has a biblical ring. It's an end-time prophetic scenario significance of what we're talking about. Revelation 12:13 through 15. When the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for times and a half time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent spewed out water out of his mouth like a flood. See, the Bible now is talking about this flood. It's talking about people. So at the end time, we're talking about a flood of people who are going to come in with lawlessness. As the Bible says, iniquity shall abound. The iniquity in the Bible, meaning lawlessness, is iniquity. At the end time, through this lawlessness, now the Pope's saying basically what the serpent, what Revelation is telling us, that he spewed out water out of his mouth like a flood. The water is reference to a flood of people. And you're seeing why we're seeing so many migrations around the world? Because at the end time, that's what's predicted is going to happen. Why? Because governments are going to become more and more evil. As droughts increase, as pestilence increases, people are going to become more and more at risk for saving lives, and they're going to be going anywhere they can. anywhere they can to save their lives. And we'll talk about that in Syria, because you're not going to believe how many people have been killed and been displaced in Syria alone since the 7 years that they've been having war in Syria. All of these things tie in together, and they all tie into an end-time biblical scenario. That's why we're pulling this together today. So now, let's take a look at another portion of this, the partial government shutdown. So now I haven't changed the subject where we're at. We're still in the focus point. All right, we're still in the focal point. Now let's get to the government shutdown, see how this comes into play. The government shutdown over the border wall funding. This is from Wall Street. The government shutdown, day 2, this was just in day 2, that the White House makes a counteroffer for less than $5 billion for the wall funding. They're not going to take it. They want no wall. They want no money to the wall. It doesn't matter that they had money before and that they supported before, because this administration is asking for it. You're not going to get it. That's what it's telling us right now. So now, partial shutdown. The U.S. government partially shut down early Saturday after lawmakers failed to reach a spending deal that centered on whether to fund construction of a wall along the U.S. and Mexico border. Now, this is from FAIR, which is the Federation for American Immigration Reform. So let's talk about the cost of immigration. I didn't shift on you. I want to bring you out the heresy, the lies, the hypocrisy of what's going on right before our very eyes. Talking about spending $5 billion is a waste of money. It won't help and it won't stop anything. That's what we're being told. Right? That's exactly what we're being told. So now, from the Washington Post, this is a fact check from FAIR. Right? This is a fact check from FAIR, which is the Federation for the American Immigration Reform. These are fact checks from Washington Post. Based on a paper by FAIR, which was released and updated in a report in 2017, that claimed taxpayers shell out approximately $134.9 billion to cover the cost of 12.5 million illegal aliens and about 4.2 million of their children, which are legal aliens at the federal, state, and local levels. We can't spend $5 billion for walls, but we're spending $135 billion to take care of them once they enter the country. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, anybody in their right mind's got to see that there's a hypocrisy going on here that has nothing to do with what's right. This is simply the government. This is the politics of a nation trying to destroy itself from within, which God said it would. And Isaiah said it's sick from its head to its toe. Now, plus, right, here's a burden. Now, this is a tax burden. In other words, out of that $135 billion, there's 12.5. Some of them are working and paying taxes of $8,000.75 per illegal family member, which brings down the total of expenses to the government at $116 billion. That's per year, by the way. This doesn't take into account everything. The additional medical expenses that are not figured into this. The incarceration rate of everybody who come in illegal. That's not taken into any of this. The truth is, this could be rising to 2 to 3 times this amount when you figure everything. This is only figuring 12.5 million. By some accounts, there's as many as 20 million illegal aliens in the country. So now, in the little chart that they had, I just wanted to bring it up because it makes it really easy to see. National cost, $134.8 billion. Taxes paid, $18 billion. Leaves the taxpayers, you and I, $116 billion. That's what we're paying. But what we're not looking at, now we're going to take it out of the physical, put it into the spiritual. What is this number telling us? Does the Bible talk about this? Yes, it does. Not in those terms, but it gives us the blessings and curses, which we will begin to talk about in just a moment. But before we do, what I want to do this. I want to show you an interview. All right, this is an interview. It's about 6 minutes long. It's a little longer than we normally play. This is an interview with Tucker by the Mayor David Rubin, who was the mayor of the Israeli town of Shiloh. I took out as much as I could of the politics end of it and brought in the fact that what we're being told, the second thing we're being told is that the borders are racial. They don't do any good. It's just racial to keep people out. And he's going to show how it doesn't work that way. So now, let's take that clip. We'll play that, and I'll be back in just a few minutes.
Yeah, and that's the other point they keep making. Walls don't work. they're totally ineffective, except in prisons and the Vatican and outside Barack Obama's house here in Washington and in almost every upper-income neighborhood in America, where walls surround the front lawns of the homes where Hillary Clinton and Beto O'Rourke hold their fundraisers. But along international borders, walls are useless. A border wall would simply create a thriving new market in taller ladders. Jeb Bush used to say that all the time. Everyone in power agrees with him. They're nodding vigorously from their gated communities.
We need border security. The wall is a part of border security. You can't have very good border security without the wall. No.
That's really not true.
Just
that is a political promise. Border security is a way to effectively honor our
And
responsibility.
the experts say you can do border security without a wall, which is wasteful and doesn't solve the problem.
It's wasteful. Walls won't solve the problem. All the experts agree on that. And they have briefed Chuck Schumer, and he's passing on the news to us. Okay, but before we accept Chuck Schumer's claim about walls as fact, just one simple question. What about Israel? Israel is our closest ally in the Middle East. It is the recipient of our largest foreign aid package by far. Pretty much everybody in Congress on both sides supports Israel, or claims to. Many of them are vocal about that support, including Chuck Schumer. And yet, here's the funny thing. Israel has plenty of walls, and not just the famous one that people pray at. Israel has border walls, some of them tall and foreboding and made of steel. Are Israel's walls immoral? Well, by Nancy Pelosi's standards, why wouldn't they be immoral? It's a pretty obvious question, so we've asked it repeatedly of Democrats on this show. And every single time we get the very same answer to the question. Israel's walls have nothing to do with immigration. They're defensive walls. They're designed to keep out terrorists and suicide bombers. There is no comparison to Israel's wall and anything that Donald Trump is proposing. It's apples and oranges. Well, it's a pretty effective talking point, and that's why every Democrat repeats it every time. But is it actually true? We got curious and decided to find out ourselves from a knowledgeable source in Israel. A short time ago, we spoke to David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's the author of the book Trump and the Jews. We had a fascinating conversation. Listen. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for joining us. There's a debate in the United States, as you're fully aware, over whether to erect a wall on our southern border to solve what is an immigration crisis. Israel has relevant experience with this exact topic. Will you explain what Israel did in response to its immigration crisis and the effect that the wall had on it?
Well, we certainly do have that experience, Tucker. Between 2010 and 2012, there were 55,000 illegal immigrants into Israel. Now, you have to understand, Israel is a tiny country, so 55,000 illegal immigrants in just a couple of years is a lot of illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And most of them settled in southern Tel Aviv, which was already a working class or a little bit rundown area. The rapes and murders in southern Tel Aviv skyrocketed in those few years. The Israeli government, under pressure from the grassroots mainly, grassroots protests from the residents of South Tel Aviv and other towns that were being overrun by these illegal immigrants, the Israeli government made a decision that they were going to build a wall, a high-tech steel wall on the southern border, the border between Egypt and Israel. So it was built over the next few years. It was completed, almost completed by 2015. In 2016, the wall was up. 2016, there were 11 illegal immigrants who entered Israel. And then they raised the height of the wall an additional several feet. And in 2017, there was not one illegal immigrant that made it through the southern border into Israel. So
that is a remarkable story.
It works.
So was there
it's a story that's...
So I'm just wondering the political part of this. So the 55,000 illegal immigrants you're describing were from Africa, as I remember, Eritrea, Sudan, parts of Africa.
Correct.
Was there anybody in Israel who said, you're racist for trying to keep them out?
Well, there was some of that, yes. Some of the people on the left were going crazy and having protests, and and they were complaining that it's a racist thing. But look, illegal immigration is illegal immigration. And I don't know if you know this, Tucker. I was born and raised in the United States. I've been living in Israel for 27 years. But the Jewish immigrants who came to America, and I wrote about this extensively in my book, Trump and the Jews, they came to America as legal immigrants. They came only to work hard and only to be full Americans. That was their goal. And so, you know, I've heard people like Ocasio-Cortez from New York, the congresswoman, talking about how the immigrants, the migrants are just like the asylum seekers, the Jewish immigrants who are seeking to escape the Nazis in World War II. It's an obscene comparison, and I've heard it too many times from the left. So, yes, there was some in the Israeli left who were complaining and who were even accusing the Israeli government of racism. But the fact is that now nobody's complaining. Everyone is happy that we don't have illegal immigration to Israel.
You know, there's a few things that I wanted to just point out before we go is that immigration isn't racial. It's an issue of law and order, which the Bible talks about. The other thing that was interesting is the fact that if they whenever it's compared to Hitler, they're always talking about taking care of the refugees or the migrants that are being running for their lives. How come they don't talk about doing the same thing with Hitler, removing the corrupt governments that create this problem? They won't do it because it's in the plan of bringing about a nation, worldwide, one-rule government that God's going to show us through the rise of that Holy Roman revival at the end time at the hands of the Pope. And that's why the Pope's always chiming in on this, because these issues are more spiritual than physical than what we realize when we look into what's going on. So now let's look at the biblical portions of this. God's warnings of the migrants because of disobedience. Deuteronomy 28, verse 30. You shall plant a vineyard, but you shall not eat of its grapes. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your donkey shall be violently taken away from before you. You shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you shall have no one to rescue them. Remember, I had a chart up here just a few minutes ago, and in that chart, it showed you that the taxpayers are paying $116 billion a year to pay for the migrants who are illegally in the United States. Let's translate that into biblical. Deuteronomy 28, verse 30. All right, so all the work and the labors that you're going through, is anybody feeling the tax burden of the taxes out of your paychecks every year? When you buy food, taxes on top of it. All the state, the federal, the government, the local, everything that you've got takes away a tremendous amount of that. And in addition to that, the security that we need through insurances that we have to pay, we're tax and insurance poor as a nation. And God says because of our disobedience that would happen. So we need to translate what they're talking about with their grapes. They were an agrarian society, and their fruits and the produce of their labors was in the fruits of what they produced. Today, in our society, the fruits of our labors is through the economic system of the payment of dollars and cents that's being paid to everybody. So it's the same thing. Nothing has changed, only the time that we live in today. So let's look again at the cost of illegal immigration, and to go show you the hypocrisy of what the government is doing right now by saying we're not going to build the border walls. While the Senate will not grant the $5 billion for funding the wall and security, at the same time, I don't know if you've seen this or not, at the same time, this came out and I circled December 18th, while they're saying you're not going to get $5 billion to build the wall, at the very same time, it's the third time I said that, is they're giving away, they're pledging $10.6 billion to Central America and to Mexico. So we're not going to pay for them here, so now we're paying the $116 billion here. So why do you think Mexico has kind of chimed down now? They're not raising a ruckus about all the problems that they have in the immigration. Why? Because behind closed doors, they met with the Mexican government and the Central American government where these people are fleeing from, and they're going to give them $10.6 billion in aid to help the migrants before they get to America. That's all coming out of your pocket again. How can they find $10.6 billion, but they can't find $5 billion for a wall? This is defiant, in the defiant of what God says, that there would be iniquity shall abound at the end days. So now, this is what's in the article. The United States pledges $5.8 billion in aid and investment Tuesday for strengthening the government, and I circled that and I put it in big bold letters, the government and economic development in Central America. The very same governments who are actually creating the problem, they're putting the candy in their fingertips again to continue in the same government administration that they have today. How much of that do you think is actually going to get to the aid of the people? Then it's another $4.8 billion in development for southern Mexico. So the very same governments who've created the problem, our government is in its infinite wisdom and hypocrisy, who won't build a wall to protect the country and to save the economics of this nation, puts another $10.6 billion into the same governments who created the problem. Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but that's exactly what's going on right here. And that's why we're pulling all this together to show you this story of what's taking place. All right, so now with that said, let's now move to focus 2, and you're going to see how some of this plays into focus 1. The United States pulling out of Syria. Again, we're going to pull this in 3 points. We're going to talk about the abandonment of the Kurds and the weight of a pullout. We'll talk about Turkey taking over ISIS, which is absolutely horrendous, but that's what's going on. And 3 is Israel says that this will not go well. So now we've found a way for the United States to be hated of all the nations, and now even Israel is wondering what in the world is going on, and they're getting concerned about their security at the same time. Trump announces to pull out from Syria. Trump recalls withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria was no surprise amid mounting backlash. So now, the Kurds betrayed again by Washington. These are the headlines, and you go on the internet and you will find tons and tons and tons of these. And we as a church have maintained for decades that the Middle East cannot be fixed short of Jesus Christ returning, because it is God's return to Jerusalem that Satan is trying to destroy. There's no amount of effort and there's no amount of war is going to fix this. So now we're beginning to see this, and this gets even worse as we go through this segment here. This came out December 22nd, that the Kurds have betrayed again. It's in a little small, I don't know if you can read this, let me read this. It is time and time again, powerful allies whose support they thought they could rely on or abandoned them. And each time we had a pullout, the Kurds have suffered the cost because they have been the fighters in Iraq. The warning signs were there all along, yet President Donald Trump's brisk decision to pull the U.S. forces out of northeast Syria nonetheless stunned the Syrians' Kurds because they didn't believe it was going to happen. Overnight, their dream of establishing an autonomous Kurdish region has been dashed, and they must now choose between a return to the mountains and a bid for survival, or staying put, awaiting the resurgence of the Assad regime and what it has in mind for them after 6 years of self-rule. So they're going to begin to see how in the world they're going to exist now, because Turkey doesn't want them there. The Assad regime doesn't want them there. In fact, nobody wants them there, and all they wanted was to take one little portion of where they lived and have their own country where they wouldn't have to answer to anybody but themselves. And now again, it looks like it's not going to take place. All right, this is from Gatestone. All right, Turkey turns on America. This is amazing how fast this happens. Supposedly, Turkey's supposed to be our friend. And in this article, within days, I think it was within 24 hours, Turkey had a meeting with the president of Iran. All right, so let's read this report. The U.S. withdrawal from Syria will end up costing Americans far more in blood and treasure down the line than the small but deterrent footprint that is there now. The damage a withdrawal will do at this time is inestimable. It will go down in history as Trump's legacy, just as Neville Chamberlain's forever is the bogus peace for our time deal Hitler dangled in front of him. It would have been so much less costly in blood and treasure to defeat Hitler before he crossed the Rhine. But that didn't happen. The same way with Trump. It says how ironic, and I brought this out now in big bold letters as Gatestone brings out, how ironic it will be if Trump were to go down in history as one of those losers he so detests. I mean, these are the reports now that's coming out of the decision that's coming out of the decision to come out of Syria, it is the same problem. It is estimated there's still as many as 30,000 ISIS fighters that are spread across that region, and most of them in Syria. And they have gone underground. The funding has been somewhat cut off. But as soon as America comes out of the picture, and it's true that America has been the policeman or the watchman for the world, you know, when America's out of the picture, we had a little taste of that during the 8 years of the Obama administration. When we pulled our hands off, the world went crazy. And you're actually beginning to see it right now. On the very day that this announcement was made that we're coming out of Syria, Russia began moving planes into the Aegean, into that area again. And so everybody's moving their chess pieces around. They're all getting ready, all right? They're all getting ready for when the United States pulls out, and it has the isolationism is like it was before World War I and before World War II, because see, the United States doesn't want to be a warring country. The problem is, without the United States, there is no peace and security in this world. And the United States has been the big brother watching everybody. But because of its disobedience now, the blessings that it brought from before have now turned to be curses. That all those nations that have been helped now, because their funding won't be there, they're going to turn on the United States. That is prophetic, and you're looking at it building right now before our very eyes. This is one of the decisions that will, again, bring about a quicker fulfillment for the end-time scenario. All right, so now let's go on with the article, what it says. This was on December 20th, 2018. It says, Erdogan held a joint press conference with the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, in which Erdogan announced that Ankara is siding with Tehran against Washington, while the United States and President Trump is putting a front that he's had this good communication with Turkey. Within 24 hours, the president of Turkey meets with the president of Iran and says that I'm siding with Iran against the United States, all right, against Washington. Warning to the U.S., all right, this is the warning that came out. This is from President Erdogan. It says, we do not think that it is right for the U.S. to withdraw from the nuclear treaty. What does that got to do with Syria? All right, but he's tying in with Iran. So now they're bringing out what everybody didn't like from the beginning. So we do not think that it is right for the U.S. to withdraw from the nuclear treaty. I would like to emphasize once again, he said, that we think that America's decision of sanctions against Iran endangers regional security. We will continue standing by the Iranian people in this period when pressures against Iran, which we think are unjust, are on the horizon. So now we're going to continue to bring greater pressure on Iran to protect with Israel in the decision that's being made. Iran hates the Kurds, and they want to get rid of them. This is a tribal warfare that's going on over there. So now as we're not over there, and the Turkey is supporting Iran, it's like hands off, go after whoever you want to go after. All right, now let's begin to wrap this session up. This is from Israel now. The Justice Minister, Ayelet Shaked, called the President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw from American troops from Syria is really bad for Israel and strengthens Turkish President Erdogan in an interview on Army Radio on Sunday morning. That's this past Sunday morning. I think that's December 23rd. So everybody in Syria is saying this is not going to go well for Israel and for the rest of the region. So now, this came out in a headline, believe it or not, this summer. Syrian war is over and American lost. This was a headline on a magazine cover. It says America lost, all right? This is what it says. This is from the Council on Foreign Relations. This was July 23rd, 2018. From 2011, President Obama in the UN Security Council said Assad must go. Remember that? Assad must go, and he drew the red line. Well, they crossed the red line, nothing happened. 7 years later, now remember what the Pope said in the previous session. And the Pope says, forget about your setting your borders, your security, take in all the migrants. Well, how many do we have? One country alone right now. There are 500,000 less Syrians that's killed. 500,000 people killed in 7 years. Where is the UN to talk about this? 11 million of them are on the run. And it's costing over $5 billion a year needed just for humanitarian assistance. That's from one country. You see how it all ties in? All of this stuff ties in together. And it's all because of disobedience to what God says that we're supposed to be doing. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This is Obama tells UN Syria that Assad must go. And before the entire world, he laid that they're not going to let it happen. Well, it did. The war's over for us. We're pulling out. They won. So now, let's talk about that just a second. Look at the humanitarian effort it's going to take. I just brought this up here, and you can freeze it to take a look at that, showing you that 6,200,000 people internally have been displaced right out of there. 13.1 are in need of humanitarian assistance. We haven't even gotten to the time of the tribulation and all the problems that's coming. This is simple governments who's beginning to create all of these problems. All right, so now, World War II, the last time that America had a true victory. Of course, we can say, well, you know, you had the Korean conflict. Well, that turned out to be a draw. We lost Vietnam, and we've been losing every war ever since. And here we are with the country of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. And after 17 years, we can't win the victory in Afghanistan. And we're going to be pulling out of that. There's no way to stop what's going on in the Middle East until Christ returns. But this is what Deuteronomy 28:5 says, and this is our nuggets. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will go out one way against them, and you flee 7 ways before them. You shall become troublesome to all the kingdoms of the earth. And that's what I was showing you in the headlines. The United States, they're a problem for everybody. They need to go. Leviticus 26, verse 36 and 37. They shall stumble over one another as if it were a sword when no one pursues them. And that's what the United States is in its running power now. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And you shall perish among the nations, and your land of your enemies shall eat you up. And so we're seeing that. And so now we've seen it in America itself. The borders coming down. The enemy's taking all the resources that we can possibly have. We're fleeing out of these countries because we can't win the victories, and God said that was going to happen. That's what we're looking at right now. All right, so one more. Leviticus 26, verse 17 through 19. It says, I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated before your enemies. Well, we are. You know, we saw the headline. The Syrian war is over, you lost. Right. Goes on to say, those who hate you shall reign over you. You shall flee when no one pursues you. And if all this, if you still do not obey me, I put still in myself, if you do not obey me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. I will break the pride of your power. We're there now. And God says the punishments are going to continue to come. We're not going to get any better than it is right now. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about another issue here, because even our biblical nugget portion actually ties into the first section. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the liberal left. Is it biblical? Is it political or biblical? But before we do, I've got a video here from PragerU. It's about a 5-minute video called The Reformation. And so let's play that video, and I'll be right back. It's a great little video.
500 years ago, on October 31st, 1517, a German Catholic monk by the name of Martin Luther posted some complaints he had about the Catholic Church on a church door in Wittenberg, Germany. Luther was upset by the church practice of selling what were known as indulgences to wealthy patrons. Indulgences might be loosely described as get-out-of-hell free cards. Pay this amount to the church, and the church would make sure you don't suffer unduly for your sins in the hereafter. Luther felt very strongly that the practice not only made the church look bad in the eyes of the common people, but had no scriptural basis. He believed the church needed to reform itself or would lose its legitimacy. Nobody, including Luther, thought that his complaints, and he had made a list of 95 of them, would amount to much. He simply wanted to spark a discussion on an issue that deeply concerned him. Instead, he set off a chain reaction that literally changed the course of history. The name we give to this change is the Protestant Reformation. Had Luther limited his criticism of the church to indulgences, as his friend, the Dutch scholar Erasmus, urged him to do, the matter might have been resolved and the old order preserved. But the headstrong Luther was not someone to be restrained. Luther was what we would call today a flawed individual. He was brilliant and charismatic, but he was also vindictive and stubborn to a fault, and at the end of his life, sadly, anti-Semitic. Luther believed there should be no separation between the Bible and the believer. Every individual should have access to the Word of God, Luther contended, as any priest did, or even the Pope. We take this view for granted now, but in the 16th century it was a radical concept. And here's why. For more than 1,000 years, the Church had been the dominant religious and political authority in Europe. It alone taught Christians how to understand the Bible. Luther was now challenging the very basis of this authority. Not surprisingly, the Church didn't take it well. What began as a squabble between a bold monk and the Catholic hierarchy soon developed into a titanic and bloody struggle that split Europe into opposing religious factions. But the consequences of Luther's ideas extended far beyond a religious dispute. It's not an exaggeration to say that as a result of Luther's ideas, the modern individual was born, a free actor, endowed with God-given rights that exist independent of government or any other institution. Each person could find those rights by reading and interpreting the Bible for himself. Of course, to do that, you had to be able to read the Bible, and throughout the first millennium right up until Luther's day, only a very few people could. Books, including the Bible, were all handwritten, a process usually that took months. This made books rare and expensive. Furthermore, most Bibles were written in Latin, the language of the church, a language familiar only to the clergy and educated elite. This exclusivity was one of the many ways in which the church maintained its power. Luther answered this problem by translating the Bible into everyday German so that anyone could read it. But his efforts would all have been for naught except for the recent invention of the printing press by a fellow German, Johannes Gutenberg. The printing press allowed for the first time in history books and soon thereafter pamphlets and newspapers to be widely distributed. Without the printing press, Luther would have likely suffered the same grim fate of other reformers before him, like Jan Hus, who was tried, convicted of heresy, and burned at the stake. But because of the printing press, Luther's movement could not be stopped, and indeed could not be controlled. Bloody religious wars between Catholic and Protestant forces quickly followed on the heels of Luther's new ideas. They lasted for 200 years and cost countless lives. The 30 Years' War alone from 1618 to 1648 is reputed to have led to about 8 million deaths from fighting, famine, and disease. But out of all this carnage, many positive changes came too. The Protestant empowerment of the individual led to capitalism and the Enlightenment, just to name two byproducts of Luther's protest. The American Revolution, with its idea that individuals endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights should be free to form their own government, was another. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, all but one was a Protestant. Pronouncing a verdict on an epoch as significant as the Reformation is very difficult. Perhaps it's best not even to try. But we can say this: no other single figure made more of an impact on the modern world than the German monk, Martin Luther. And even he would be surprised to know that. I'm Stephen Corneels of Wartburg Theological Seminary for Prager University.
Welcome back. Any idea where I put that video in? Well, I was going to give you a quiz and come back next week and tell you, but let me go ahead and tell you today. Is because Martin Luther raised up against the Catholic Church, who was in control and dominating the world at that time of the spiritual significance, supposedly, of what they controlled. That same church is going to try to maintain control and domination one more time. But this time it won't be Martin Luther who's going to come in. It's going to be Jesus Christ, and he's going to set men free. All men free, coming back. So you see, even that little video ties in what we're talking about for end-time prophecy. All right, so now let's move on. All right, so let's take a look now at the Bible, the liberal left. So what does the Bible say? Do you ever wonder why the left is the left and the right is the right? So when you go back and you look at the history of where things come from, you can trace this all the way back to the Bible. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. The biblical left or political. Ecclesiastic 10 verses 2 through 5. So the wise man in his heart says here, the wise man's heart is at his right hand, but the fool's heart is at his left. I didn't say that. So if the left has got a problem at this, you need to take a look what the Bible says, because I said, wow, this is pretty interesting. Let's go on. Yea, also, he that is a fool, talking about the left, walks by the way, his wisdom fails him, and he says to everyone that he is a fool by their actions. Everything I went through today, when you look at the foolishness and the hypocrisy of the left, it makes no sense. Well, the Bible says that's because the way they're thinking, all right? It says, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against you, leaves not your place, for yielding pacifies great offenses. It says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, is an error which proceeds from the ruler. In other words, it starts from the top and it works its way down. If you don't do things right, it becomes like a fool's folly is basically what the Bible is trying to tell us here. So the word fool comes from Strong's 3684, meskeil, which means to be stupid, silly, foolish, fool, or there's no wisdom in it. All right, so God's saying that the left is foolish. In other words, decision-making from the left thinking makes no sense. So if you try to make sense of what they're saying, you'll never get it figured out because it makes no sense. It's used 70 times in the Old Testament, all in the books of wisdom. That's interesting also, all except for 3 times which are in Psalms. And even in the Psalms, that's talking about the wisdom of what it's talking about. Psalms 92 verses 5 and 6. O Lord, how great are your works, and your thoughts are very deep. It says, a brutish man knows not, neither does a fool understand this. That's pretty simple. It says, Lord, how great are your works, and they're so deep. And he's saying, the fool, the left, they don't understand this. That's why the left keeps telling you basically there is no God. That's why it doesn't matter that you can have an abortion and kill people, because it makes no sense to them what God says. All of the roots go back to the biblical points. All right, going on. The liberal, all right, let's talk about the liberal. Isaiah 32 verse 5. This is from the King James Version of it. Then I'm going to have you from the NIV version, which makes it a little easier to read. The King James Version says, the vile, the fool person, shall be no more called liberal. The liberal was the noble. There was the translation for noble, nor that's, I believe, the church, I think that should be church said to be bountiful. All right, so here's Isaiah 32, 5 through 8. This is verse 5 in the NIV, and I'm going to read it from here because it makes it a lot plainer to understand what we're looking at. It says, no longer will the fool be called noble, nor the scoundrel be highly respected. The fool speaks folly, their hearts are bent on evil. Now, who's the fool? It's the left, God says. That's what he's calling the left. They practice ungodliness and spread error concerning the Lord. The hungry they leave empty, and from the thirsty they withhold water. And that's what we're looking at going on around the world today. The decisions of the liberal left is leaving the rest of the world in this condition. Scoundrels, or the liberals, God says, use the wicked methods, and they make up evil schemes to destroy the poor with lies, even with the plea of the needy is just. And they take advantage of the poor and the weak. And you have seen it for decades in this country. You've seen it now going on around the world. So we look at the two. What we're looking at, the Bible tells us this is wrong and this is evil. But the noble make noble plans, and by noble deeds they stand. In other words, these are noble things that we're doing. And you'll see the pontification of the White House and the liberal left and how they stand on all these points and their foolishness before God and their evil before his throne. Now, one last. Jesus and the right and left. Matthew 25, verses 34 and 41. says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. That's for those who are on the right. Then he'll say to those on his left, the left, we know who the left is from the Old Testament. It says, depart from me, you who are cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Is talking about left and liberalism political? No. It's got its roots all the way back into Scripture, and Jesus' word confirms what we're saying. I just wanted to bring that out because people say we don't want to cover political issues. The problem is the political issues have involved in people's lives in church now, and there's no way to separate them. We're at that time of biblical fulfillment right now. All right, now let's move on toward the end of our program, December 28th. Let's see what we have here. All right, in the mail, we have the January newsletter. We have the card that's going out, a sermon delivered last week called Watch 2019, the March to the Return of Christ. And we also have the newsletter that went out with it last week. And this is actually the title slide that I thought I'd bring up. Pretty interesting little slide, get a lot of attention, a lot of color. So if you on the mailing list, if you're not on the mailing list, by all means, get on the mailing list. And then right for this sermon, we cover all specific points. There's 14 points that we cover, things to watch for in 2019. There's really, and it's a powerful message and covers a lot of things. And we're actually looking at 14 points that were given in 2002 by Mr. Armstrong and show them where we are today and give like a little report card. All right, also in the mail this week, the December 18th card on God's seals, personally touched by God. That actually went into the mail. As you know, every month we offer a card. That's 4 to 6 weeks later, we put it out. That's in the mail. And also with it, last week's N&I on subjects that we're talking about part of today. It drew a lot of attention. We decided to go ahead and let's just go ahead and mail this out. It talked about the religious snitch that people never heard of. Talking about the UN condemning Israel for protecting itself and not going against the Arab people over there who are shooting missiles in there. And we also talked about the EU and Japan, how they're beginning to pull away from the United States. And this is going to come into play, especially with our debt coming this year. All righty, I'm on the road again. January 12th, I will be in Tennessee, Whitwell, Tennessee. And I'll be there for the Sabbath services at 1 o'clock. So if you would like to go, if you're anywhere in the area, come give Kenneth or Stephanie Britton a call, 256-663-9534. Or you can see the email address right there. You can freeze this DVD, and you can write to them, get information. It's not the easiest place to find up there, but it's not real difficult, especially if you've been there one time. So if you're going to be anywhere in the area on January 12th, come on by. We'd love to see you. Later in the month, I will be up in Savannah. Actually, it's right outside. Pine Grove. It's called Garden City. All right, Pine Grove. I'll get this correct and put Savannah up here because it's right outside the town of Savannah, Georgia. But it's actually called Garden City, Georgia. All right, Garden City, Georgia. This is where they meet at. You can contact Eddie Fountain or Marcia Key, and there's all the information. Again, freeze the DVD, and you can get all this information. Give them a call, and they're going to be meeting at 12 noon, January 26th. So I'll be over there January 26th to meet with the brethren over there. Elwood Woodcock will be coming down with us, also one of the ministers for the church, because we're going to have a great Sabbath. So come on out if you're in that area. Put it on your calendar. So come on out and and visit with everybody. One more time, I want to let you know we have a Roku channel now that's up and running, and there's the address for our Roku. All right, instead of me just giving you all those names again, trying to write them all down again, freeze the DVD, and you can get the information. So if you're on the road or you have Roku at your house, now you can put an app on your TV or on your handheld device, and you go right to our Roku channel to watch our programs for the Church of God Ministries International. All righty, that's about it. We've got 2 videos we're going to close with today, though. 2 videos. The very first one, this is for our youth. As you know that Caruso, as we get all our little animals for, Caruso, remember last time we showed Caruso, he went hunting on Thanksgiving. This time he's a hero in a snow avalanche. So let's play Caruso, and I'll be right back. can't help but love Crusoe. I hope the kids love him too. Remember now, he saved a person from drowning. He went hunting, got him a turkey, and now he saved somebody from an avalanche. Rescued Crusoe. Can't wait to find what he does next year. Stay tuned. Well, that's it for news, nuggets, and insights, except for one more video toward the end of our program now. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you goodbye now, and we're going to play the video. But before I do, I want to tell everybody how much we appreciate all your love and your support for helping us get the word out to everybody that you can get it to. 2018 has been a powerful year for our work, for the outreach, and especially for News Nuggets and Insights. We've reached a lot of people thanks to you. We hope that you'll be with us for 2019. We thank you for your support and hope that you'll continue to help us get the word out. So until next year, God be with you.